Those buses contain some of the 153 Russian diplomats expelled by the West in the wake of that poisoning in Great Britain of a former Russian spy. In return, Russia's expelled 142 Western diplomats from Moscow, one sign of the worst relations between Russia and the U.S. since the days of the Cold War. I want to talk about that and other foreign policy challenges facing President Trump and his team with our panel of experts. Meghan O'Sullivan, she served as Deputy National Security Advisor for George W. Bush, now an international affairs professor at Harvard's Kennedy School, author of a new book, Windfall: How the New Energy Abundance Upends Global Politics, Strengthens America's Power. Elizabeth Sherwood-Randall, she held national security roles in the Obama administration, including Deputy Secretary of Energy, now a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. And Susan Glasser, soon to be a staff writer for The New Yorker. And Susan, let me begin with you, because you were also Moscow bureau chief with your husband, Peter Baker, for The Washington Post during President Putin's first term. I guess, first of all, do you agree with that assessment I just made about this being the worst relations between Russia and the West since the Cold War? And do you have a sense of what Putin's endgame is here?
Well, you know, first of all, new Cold War, if you look at that right now, you've never heard the term more. In the last 25 years, I think it really is a period of the highest tensions that there really have been, arguably, even since before Gorbachev. We had better relationships, and we're talking more frequently in the late 1980s than we are with Moscow today. President Putin has already become the longest-serving Russian leader since Joseph Stalin. He was just reelected to another 6-year term. Remember, President Trump famously was not supposed to congratulate him, but did for this. The question is, what is he going to do with that new 6-year mandate? He's got wars in Ukraine, in Syria. He's now got this conflict with the West, and not just Great Britain, but the United States and other Western allies over this poisoning of a former Russian spy. I think we could be in for a period of additional escalation rather than this scenario of, well, finally, Putin's going to moderate. I don't see any sign of that.
Liz Sherwood-Randall, one sign we've seen of that, we saw him publicize that ICBM test this week that came in the wake of that diagram he showed just a couple of weeks ago targeting South Florida, maybe even Mar-a-Lago. It appears that we could be in for a new arms race with Russia as well.
So we need to maintain our nuclear deterrent against all threats. But at the same time, as Susan has just said, we don't have an interest in escalation into a new Cold War. And so we do need to maintain channels of communication, and we need to be pursuing options that give our president alternatives to resorting to nuclear war.
Well, you want the alternatives. One of the things we've seen, Meghan O'Sullivan, is that this sort of disconnect between President Trump's rhetoric. Susan just mentioned that he congratulated Vladimir Putin, wasn't supposed to do that, and some relatively tough actions by his administration, finally imposing those sanctions, going through with expelling Russian diplomats.
Well, I think it's true that the actions of the Trump administration have not been anything like people had expected because of this relationship between Trump and Putin. But we have to keep in mind that this deterioration in the relationship is not just because President Trump is constrained. President Putin also really doesn't have much of an interest in diffusing tension with the West because he has some internal dynamics. He can't deliver economic growth in this global energy market scenario. And as a result, he has to deliver psychological benefits. And the best way he's been able to do that is by having this confrontation with the West and the United States in particular.
Susan, one of the places we see the conflict play out is also in Syria, of course, and the president surprising so many with that announcement on Thursday that he wants to pull out of Syria.
You know, I thought in many ways that was an extraordinary and very relevant to, if you're trying to understand Trump foreign policy. What did he say? He said, let other people take care of it. People talk about the post-American world. That was the post-American world in action. It's time for other people to take care of it. Trump always has a feeling, it seems to me, when he talks about foreign policy, that America's getting cheated somehow, or that other people aren't doing the hard work of international relations. And, you know, even this action on Russia, we expelled diplomats, we talked tough, we joined our allies, and yet you never saw President Trump personally take responsibility for that or tweet about it or talk about it. And so I feel like there's really a sense that America is very reluctantly acting to lead when it is at all.
One place, Liz Sherwood, that the president may not want others to step in so aggressively is the conflict with North Korea. He seems to want that summit with Kim Jong-un for himself. Yet one of the things we saw this week is that extraordinary meeting between President Xi of China and Kim Jong-un, the first visit by Kim Jong-un outside of North Korea. And the Financial Times reported yesterday that it came after a dramatic tightening of oil exports by China. It seems like President Xi is trying to get in this game and signal that he's in charge.
So this is very important, George, because we have many interests in the Asian region that go beyond North Korea. So while we want to be aligned with China in putting pressure on North Korea and pursuing a negotiation that will ultimately lead to the denuclearization of North Korea, we have a long game to play in the region. And the Chinese interests and the American interests are not always aligned there. So our goal needs to be firmly aligned with our allies in the Republic of Korea in the south to develop a negotiating strategy that gives no opportunity for us to be pushed out of the region, and no bargaining chip should be put on the table that would reduce the American troop presence, reduce our exercising with our allies there, or in any way push the United States out of the Asian region.
You say that's the greatest danger, getting pushed out of the region, but I want to bring that to Meghan O'Sullivan. As we talk about this summit, my understanding that when Kim Jong-un, to the extent he may or may not talk about denuclearization, he means getting the United States out of the region.
Yes, when he says denuclearization, he's talking about that only in the context of a peace treaty with the United States. And a peace treaty is more than it sounds, in the sense that a peace treaty includes, as Liz just mentioned, removal of U.S. forces, certainly from the peninsula, and potentially getting rid of the UN resolutions that have been in place since the end of the Korean War. So he is definitely talking about a diminution of American presence in Korea and, as a result, in the region as a whole. And that relates to Japan and obviously South Korea as well. So China's not the only country that's feeling a little nervous that this bilateral potential meeting could squeeze out some larger interest of regional actors that are used to dealing with North Korea, to the extent there was any diplomacy, through a multi-party framework.
You said potential meeting. Liz, are you convinced the meeting's going to happen, and what are the risks?
There are lots of risks in this meeting, George. First of all, as I noted, we could be in a situation in which we negotiate away something we need to preserve, and that is the American presence in the region. But I also see opportunities because we have maximum economic pressure right now in place against North Korea. The North Koreans continue to build their arsenal, and that means the time is ripe for a negotiation. And Trump's fiery rhetoric, which has the risk of escalating into a nuclear war, has created an incentive for everybody to come to the table. So we have some reason to have hope that this can lead us to a new scenario that would be preferential for United States interests.
This is being prepared now by a new national security team for the president. John Bolton coming in as national security advisor, Mike Pompeo coming in as Secretary of State. We saw the first meeting this week between Bolton and Jim Mattis, this Pentagon secretary.
Ambassador Bolton.
Mr. Secretary,
It's
so
good
good
to
to
meet
see
you.
you. Thank you for inviting me over. I
Oh,
appreciate
no.
it.
Thanks for coming, and it's good to finally meet you. Absolutely. I've heard that you're absolutely devil incarnate. I wanted to meet you.
You may not have heard that there. Matt is saying, I've heard you're the devil incarnate. I wanted to meet you there. Susan Glasser, this team does have strikingly different views from those who came before. We know that John Bolton has been a hardliner on Iran, has been a hardliner on North Korea, the same with Mike Pompeo. And the question is, will they be able to follow through on this summit with North Korea, and how?
Well, and on Russia as well, by the way. They all have significantly more hawkish views than the president himself. I think a lot of people look at Bolton's appointment and this summit on North Korea, and they think it increases the possibility that the summit either won't happen or will be basically a pretext, in that they'll come out and say it failed, and let's take that preemptive military action that John Bolton is on the record as advocating. However, I agree with you that President Trump really wants this summit to happen, right? He personally staked his capital on it. He'd love nothing more than to proclaim himself the deal maker who got it done where other presidents, Bush and Obama, couldn't. You could see a scenario where he and Kim come out, they say, we've done it, we've made an agreement in principle, and then it takes years for it to emerge that this agreement was simply too hard to work out in the details. So I wouldn't rule that out.
And Meghan O'Sullivan, both you and Liz have served on the National Security Council staff. One of the big questions about John Bolton coming in is, can he actually fulfill that traditional role of a national security advisor and assure that all views are brought to the table? Now, this is sometimes honored in the breach, but the national security advisor is supposed to be an honest broker.
Exactly, and that's the term, honest broker. And that may be the most important part of this job. Many Americans probably look at this job and they think the most important element is advising the president, but really being the protector of the process. That is the key role of the National Security Advisor. And that's not only being able to represent the views of other agencies when those individuals at the head of those agencies aren't in the room. It also means making sure that all the options are considered as dispassionately as possible, that the president has all his options laid out for him. This is something that takes a very cool, collected, calm, maybe non-judgmental approach. And I think there are concerns about Bolton, not only from his policy views, but also his temperament and whether or not he'll be inclined to encourage Trump to adopt a process in general, which seems to go against Trump's instincts as we've seen them so far.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you all for a great discussion. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.